Hello. Hi there, and welcome to the Self-Publishing Roundtable, episode 57. I am going to be your guest host today. I am Kevin Michael. Joined with me, as always, is the incomparable Carl Sinclair. Trish, Wade, and John all could not be here, but they will be back next week. In their place, we have New York Times bestselling romance author Zoe York. Thank you for joining us. And then this week we have very special guest, New York Times bestseller, USA Today bestseller, and Amazon best-selling romance writer Roxie Rivera. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right. For those who don't know, Roxy has a number of different romance series. One is called her Russian Protector, about a woman that is searching for her sister and has to go recruit a fighter from the Houston Underground to find her, and then all kinds of romance and violence ensues. Um, and then she has another series called The Fighting Connollys, um, also with the fighting and sexy dude romantic theme. Um, I guess the first question we'll go with is, what kind of books did you read growing up, and what made you want to become a romance author?
That's a broad one. I read a lot of romance novels as a kid. I still remember finding this copy of the battered copy of Kathleen Woodiwis's The Flame and the Flower, which was like way too old for me to have been reading, but it was so good and I couldn't stop reading it. And I thought someday I'm going to write books like that that make you all excited and tingly and happy. And that's basically how I ended up in romance.
So, do you want to tell us the inspiration behind her Russian Protector? Like, why you decided to go with that?
I had when my daughter was sick, I had read a Harlequin Presents novel. I think it was by Lynn Graham, and it had this Russian hero. He was very alpha, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And it was a really good book. And then a couple weeks later, I just happened to be awake late at night, and Eastern Promises came on, which is the Viggo Mortensen film about Russian mafia or the Bratva in London. And so the seed of an idea was planted. And not long after that, one of my brothers, who is really big into tattoos, he was telling about this documentary called The Mark of Cain. And so I found it, started watching it, and it was this whole crazy, wild, interesting world. And I thought I knew a lot about cartels and how those worked. And I thought, well, what about, the Russian mob? And then I started thinking about, a girl who knows nothing about this world being thrown into the middle of it. And then Ivan's story was born, and it just kind of spiraled from there.
So, Roxy, if I could take you back a little bit before that, you've been a romance writer since 2007, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what pushed you to make the leap to self-publishing? This is a two-part question. Talk generally about your decision to leave or to move away from just writing for publishers, and also why did you choose that particular subgenre, knowing that it wasn't something that there was a demand for in the marketplace?
So I guess the mercenary answer is money. I know that's something people probably think is crass to talk about, but it's true. We have a daughter who has special needs. She has heart defects and she also has autism. And I knew we needed to bring in more income. And I had kind of reached this point in traditional publishing where I wasn't getting anywhere. Like I was publishing more books and I was signing more contracts, but it was like I could not make more than like $16,000 in a year. And I was thinking I could go work at McDonald's, right, and make more money and spend less time on these books than I was. And around that time, um, I remember seeing at Romance Divas Gemma Halliday after the whole Dorchester debacle. She had really taken control of her career, and she had started self-publishing her backlist. And I knew Jana De Leon had also done that. And I remember watching Deanna Chase did mentor thread. Do you remember that mentor thread at Romance Divas that she did with Gemma? Right. It was eye-opening. And I remember thinking, why the hell am I sitting here making like 20 cents a book or whatever it was, and getting nowhere when I could really, um, you know, maybe do better. And so I remember watching what Russell Blake was doing and LKC was doing, and I thought, okay, I just need to have a plan. And I had all of these stories that I had been trying to sell, the Russian stories, this idea of them. But I always got told, well, these are too gritty. These are too sexy for this line. Latina romance doesn't sell. You can't mix IR romance with plain romance, and the same bullshit story that you always hear. Which the truth is, it's not that it doesn't sell; it's they don't know how to market it, right? Or it has to fit in that tiny little shelf they have at the bottom of Barnes and Noble in the romance section. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to publish the series. I'm going to do one book every 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and we're going to see what happens. And it took off from there.
Yeah.
So,
did you have a gut feeling that there was a reader base for those stories?
Yes, because I thought this is a story I wanted to read, and a lot of times I would read like a romantic suspense or like a kind of underworldy type book, and I would always be thinking, why isn't this sexier? Why isn't there like more, violence or whatever? And I also knew that like readers, people loved watching Sons of Anarchy, right? That's a really like violent show. It's really sexy and violent. And I thought, that surely there were readers out there who wanted to read that. And that was right around the time all the MC, the motorcycle club books were starting to show up. And so I thought, I think these Russian books could really do okay if I try.
Now I have a question because you have the Russian Protector series and then you have the Fighting Connolly series, and they both involve like underground stuff, but they also involve a lot of fighting. Do you
Hmm.
do you watch MMA, or did you have to do a lot of research for these
I do
books going in?
I do watch it, not as much as I probably should, considering I'm writing about it. But my brothers really enjoy it a lot, and so they were people I could ask questions of pretty easily.
So with the Russian stuff, did you have to try? I mean, I know like KGB stuff is hard to do research on, but did you do some research or read some books or watch some movies about specifically to get the
Yeah,
details?
I did. I did a lot of I did a lot of research and stuff, and I also got really lucky after the second Russian Protector book came out. A nurse from Pennsylvania contacted me, and she is Russian born, but she lives in America. And she was like, I would. There were tiny little things like cultural things I hadn't gotten right, and there were some issues with words that could have been better chosen in Russian. And so her name is Rima, and I'm sure she's watching. And she helped me. She gets the book after I'm done with it, and she goes through it and combs through and helps me and says, this is what the cultural, how this should be. You should change this, or you should change that, or I wouldn't use this word, or I would use that word, and that helps a lot to
That's
kind of get
amazing.
the authenticity. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to know a little bit about your reader base then. I mean, that sounds like you have some readers that are really invested in your series and want it to be successful just as much as you do.
I think so. I've been really lucky to have readers who have been like totally committed to these books. And I think that without word of mouth, I would not be to the point that I'm at today. There's absolutely no way. Because I know when Sergei came out, that was the book that like broke it open for me. That was like the fifth book in the series, and that was when it just completely exploded. And that's an IR romance, which of course New York says doesn't sell. Um, and the readers who like those types of romances, they are voracious and they will support you like you cannot believe. They're amazing, wonderful readers. I didn't have any idea that there were all of these like secret book clubs on Facebook for specific like, subgenres. They're out there. And these readers are amazing, and I totally 100% credit them with a lot of my success.
Do you interact with them on Facebook in those groups or just in your own group? Or how do you manage that social media?
I do a little bit of both. quite a few of them have asked me to come join their book groups so that they can ask me questions. The only reason there was like the Sergei sequel, I never planned to write a sequel, right? But I had all these these book club groups who contacted me like one after the other. I mean, they were like hundreds of readers, and they were like, "Please continue the story. Don't just leave it there." And so that was how the Sergei sequel happened because the readers were like, "We want that. We want to read it."
Yeah.
So.
And now you've done that again, right, for Nikolai?
I have. I needed a way to tie up some story ends that were they weren't, they needed to be more neatly tied up. And I thought, Nikolai would be a sequel for that couple would be the best way to tie this all in so I could start the next story arc that starts with Kostya's book. So Kostya, Alexei, Danila, and some others, 10 probably.
Okay. I think are we having some technical difficulties, Carl?
Basically,
Yeah, the chat seems to have disappeared from the website. I'm trying to get it working. All I can suggest is that you potentially go over to the YouTube chat comment window by clicking the link in the embedded video if you want to talk until I get it working, and I'll let you know.
We should do that, or people watching should do that?
The people watching should do that.
anyone with questions should do that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, Roxie, you have written now how many books in this series? 7 books, including the sequels.
Let's see, Ivan, Dmitry, Yuri, Nikolai, Sergei. Yes, 7.
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
And they're of varying lengths, right?
Yes. They're between like the novels are between 75 and like 95,000 words, and the sequel, the first book, of course, was a novella. It was about 30,000 words, and Sergei's sequel was like 55, 60, I think. So short novel territory.
Now, one question I have for you is you said that you really kind of got the word of mouth at about book 5. Were you still getting pretty steady sales, like to lead all the way up to book 5? Because a lot of people, if they don't get sales, right away within book 1 or 2, they're like, screw this series, I'm on to, steampunk or whatever. But it's a great story that you have that you kept going. I just want to make sure, like, I just want to see if you were doing really well to get there. I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I have my spreadsheet open now. And so the first month I published was February of 2013. That's when I put out Ivan. And it looks like I sold right around 900 copies, which is kind of crazy. I'm not sure how it did that well, but it did. Oh, I do know how it did that well. Somebody, a Goodreads reader who had a really big following, she picked it up and she suggested it to a whole bunch of people and it took off. And then it looks like it looks like I doubled basically every month. And then in the summer, June and July, August, I had a pretty big slump, it looks like. And then September was when I had a BookBub ad. And the BookBub ad for the box set, that's what I did. I put the first 3 books in a box set, and that's when it really took off.
Okay, so just to go back to the beginning of that particular series, you released them 6 weeks apart.
Right. So
sorry.
Okay.
I wanted to know about before that, like before you released the first one, how many did you have written, or were you writing them like as you were you writing one every 6 weeks to get them out?
Yeah, I think I had finished Ivan and like half of Dmitry. And then I was like, okay, I gotta keep going at this point. So yeah, it's been a really crazy year. Like I was thinking that at RWA, I was sitting in the bar having a drink, and I thought, holy hell, have I really written that many books in like 15 months? And yeah, I have.
Okay.
Now, I have a question about, you released the first one, but did you do any kind of special launch? Like, did you give away a whole bunch of advanced copies on NetGalley or Goodreads, or did you do blog tours or anything, or did you just kind of like unleash it on the world?
I just unleashed it. And what happened was right after I released Ivan, maybe like in early March, I was given the name of a blog tour operator, and she was also a VA, and I started talking to her, and she was like, why don't we do a tour for the first 2 books, and then after when you have Nikolai, so it would have been Yuri and Nikolai, the book 3 and 4, she's like, then we'll do a tour for those. And I think that helped, like, because I spent quite a bit of money on blog tours and a lot of time. They're a real big time suck. But I think in romance, if you go with one of the bigger tour companies and you get onto the bigger blogs, you can still make a pretty good um, splash, you know. And I think that was one of the things that helped a lot because the book covers were out there and everybody was seeing them. And so people were picking up, and around that time I had dropped the price on Ivan to like 99 cents. It was a really cheap intro to the series. I hadn't gone free on it yet.
Cool. So one of the things that I have learned from you as a newer author is that the number of hours that you put into it is directly related to the compensation that you'll get out of it. And I've heard you say that you work an 80-hour work week sometimes to get it.
Sometimes.
And well, I think I think it's amazing that you are that honest about that. And also, I think it's amazing that you manage that with a special needs kiddo and a life and sleep and all of that. So, can you talk a little bit about that? About how you fit in work in sometimes suboptimal conditions?
Yeah. I think part of that is just like necessity. Like when you have to get something done and you know that like if you don't get this finished, you're not going to have, XYZ income that you're potentially going to need for your kid to go to therapy or for your kid to have heart surgery or something. You kind of find a way to get through it and keep going. But one of the things I've always done is that I'm really lucky to have a husband who he is a paramedic, so he works 24-hour shifts. But when he gets off, he is 100% on kid duty, house duty, all of that. And now that the books are selling much, much better, he's cut back to like 3 days a week. So 4 days a week, he handles all of her therapy and her autism therapy, occupational speech, and all of that. And so I have like these big blocks of time where I work. So basically Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I don't leave my office at all. I'm literally in here writing. And then on the days when I'm with kiddo, those are the days where I handle like businessy things where I can, be in the middle of answering questions or trying to figure out if I'm going to do this audiobook or not. You know what I mean? Things like that. And it's okay if I'm interrupted. So.
Okay. I just want to point out before we go to the next question, Carl just said it looks like you can go back to commenting and leaving questions on Livefire on the actual SPRT site.
Yeah, you just need to probably refresh your browser.
One question I have, since you try to fit in all these like small chunks you have of work, do you have any productivity tips about how to get as many words down as possible, or do you like do an hour at a time and then take like a half an hour break, or do you just like binge write?
Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, I binge write. I just blow through it. But one thing that really helped me, and I've talked about this before to other people, is I read Rachel Aaron's 2K to 10K. And that's like an amazing book. And I remember thinking,
I've read it like 3 times. It's so good.
Yeah. So that's one thing I do. I used to be, when I was just traditionally published, I pantsed. And so I spent a lot of like wasted time just trying to figure out what the hell was going to happen next in the books. And now before I get started, I will put like a paragraph for every chapter so that it's like a roadmap to get me through the book. And if I hit a spot where I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, I just skip it and leave like a highlight, and then I just go to the next scene, and then I come back in and fill it in later. Because I don't have time. Go ahead.
Can I ask a quick question there about that outlining? Do you, because there are some of us who still consider ourselves pantsers, even though we do that, but then we're constantly do you change your outline as you go? Or are you like, do you commit to it because there's another story that can be told another time in another way?
I try to stick to it because a lot of times when I'm outlining, I am outlining 2 or 3 books at a time, especially in like the Russians or the debt collection series that I'm writing now with the Albanian mom. And so everything that happens in this book is built on the next books. So I have to be really careful that I don't work myself into these little corners that I can't get out of.
I've got a question that came up from YouTube from Brenna Aubrey, and it's something that I was thinking as well. You talked about these different guys and these different series that you've got going with the specific Russian guys, Nikolai and some of the others. And she said, how do you introduce your future heroes and heroines into your book so that readers will look forward to getting to their stories?
Yeah, I think I kind of stumbled into that by accident. In the first book, you meet Ivan, but the book opens with Aaron, Vivian and Lena sitting in this car trying to convince Aaron not to go into this warehouse where this, MMA gym is, because they're like, this guy used to be in the Russian mob. You do not want to go in there. These are not the people you go to for help. And so as the story you're introduced to these friends of his who are helping him along the way, right? So Dmitri knows, a kid who's tied in with the Hermanos street gang, and Yuri owns a club where Aaron's sister and her boyfriend had tried to sell these drugs, right? So he knew him there. And Nikolai, of course, is the mob boss who knows everything that's going on in town. So if you need protection, that's who you go to. And I think that if you give readers just a tiny little look, and it has to be like something that's really interesting and intriguing, and you say, so they know this guy is in the background, and you build on him in every single book. Like in Ivan's book, the major secondary male character is Dmitri, right? And Dmitri's book is book 2. And in Dmitri's book, the major secondary male character is Yuri. And Yuri is book 3. And so I kind of just build incrementally in each book with these characters, and then introduce new ones as I know there are going to be more books coming. If that makes sense, sort of.
It does. I think it's mad genius.
Yeah, super mad genius.
One thing I find awesome about your career is that you have, in the Russian Protector series, you have like 7 books, and in the Fighting Connollys you have 3. I was wondering if you could talk for a second about like the importance of having long series in terms of promotion, and how each new book will help like your previous books. If you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I don't know that was also something I just sort of stumbled into by accident. I knew I wanted to tell all these stories. I had originally just planned the Russian books to just be 4 books, but I had introduced Sergei's character in Nikolai, and a lot of people were like, "Who is this guy? Like, what is his story?" And I thought, well, it's a pretty interesting story actually, and so I thought, well, shit, I'll just write it. And so I think that's part of it. Now, I do think that one of the mistakes I did make was that I should have, I probably should have gotten beyond the Sergei and Nikolai sequels before I did the Fighting Connollys trilogy. That's one thing I think that I probably should have done differently. If I could go back, I probably would have, just so that there was a complete story arc in one series before I launched the second one. So, yeah.
Now, do you have a tie-in between like Fighting Connollys and the Russian Protector, so that
Yes.
so it's really kind of like a 10-book series, but like 2.
Yeah, the Russians, the Connolly brothers, and the Debt Collection series, they're all in the same Houston underworld. And what I did with the Fighting Connollys is In Kelly's Corner, which is book 1 in Fighting Connollys, shares the exact same storyline, timeline as Sergei. Sergei and Kelly actually end up fighting each other in this underground match because Kelly's dad owes a whole bunch of money to the Albanian mob, and their fighter got pretty badly hurt in a car accident. So they're like, hey, guess what? You know how to fight, so you're going to fight for us to pay off your dad's debt. And Sergei, of course, is owned by the Russian mob. So he is the one they end up having to fight. So that's how I spun off that series, so that you read book 5, then you can read book 1. Yeah. And you get the rest of the books.
Roxy, can I just quickly interrupt, because whilst most of our audience is very smart and wonderful romance readers today, I imagine, and writers, I don't know what IR means. Can you tell us what that means? What's an IR?
Yeah, it's interracial romance.
Okay.
And I write some of the stories are what they call BWWM romance, which if you're going to tag your books with keywords, you want to use that keyword. It's a black woman, white man romance, which I did not even know that was a tag until someone was like, why aren't you tagging your books like this? So if you are going to write interracial romance, you need to make sure those are the tags you're using at places like Barnes & Noble and, KDP and everywhere else you're uploading.
Yeah. That's a perfect segue, Roxy, to my next question, which is branding and the changing face of branding, the changing world of behind the scenes. Something that I've seen you talk a lot about on Romance Divas is properly tagging your books and writing your blurbs so that they connect properly, that they connect with the audience, right?
Hmm.
Because your audience only has a few seconds. You only have a few seconds in front of your audience, and so you want to grab their attention. Can you can you talk a little bit about that and how that's changed? I know you've recently decided to change your covers, right?
Yes, yeah. I'm changing all of the Russian covers because um, I feel like I'm not getting very good market penetration at places like iBooks, and I'm almost 100% positive it's because the books are too sexy. The covers are, all this man chest. And one thing you'll notice about iBooks is that they they tend to only feature books that have a very specific kind of look. So if you go to iBooks and you look in the romance section, you'll understand what I'm talking about. So that's one thing I am spending a little bit of money redoing all of those. I think the reason the Russian books have the covers they do is because the day that I decided that I was going to do Ivan, I mean, I literally had like 37 cents left over to play with after like, all of our bills were paid and medical bills and savings and all that. So I didn't have like all of this money to put into like these amazing covers. So I had, there had been a tutorial on Romance Divas that Dara England did about, um, about how to make covers using GIMP, and that was what I came up with. So, but keywords are something that I'm also doing a lot of
Just kind
different
of
things with
on
now.
this branding thing, there's a question from Tucker who is on the website, and he says he's romance ignorant. He wanted to know if you've had trouble with getting your books classified as erotica and what distinguishes between something like a hot romance from erotica. I guess
Yeah, I
that's
do.
kind of the same issue you've had with the covers as well, I suppose.
Right. One of the things that I had a real big problem with, and one of the reasons why I ended up buying a Mac, was because I could not get my books out of like the erotica ghetto when I went through Smashwords. And it was like no matter what I tried, I could not get them out of there. And so in January, we bought a Mac, and my husband and I taught ourselves how to do it. And with that first month, I made like 7 or 8 times as much money as I had made since the very first time I'd ever self-published a book, like in 2011 under my old name. Where I had stuff. I mean, it was crazy, and all it was getting out of that erotica section. And as far as erotica versus hot romance, the line that you always hear in the romance community is that if you take the sex out and you still have a story, it's a romance. If you take the sex out and the story falls apart, it's erotica. Because in erotica, the sex scenes drive the romance story forward or drive the story forward.
That's actually a really great description of it and a really great point.
Mhm.
Um, I have a question for you, because you write interracial romance. I was wondering if you could talk about kind of like the market. Do they prefer? I know you have like a black, white, and Hispanic. Like I was wondering, do they prefer like them to be within the same race, or does it matter if they're one of each, or which kind of sells better if you have like a Hispanic guy and a white woman, or is there a difference in which is more popular?
I think right now, the African American woman, white guy is like there's just no comparison to how much the sales difference in those kinds of books. They're just there's a huge voracious group of readers who want those stories, and they haven't been served by New York. Like who's writing them? The only people who are writing them are either digitally first published, so they're with like Eller's Cave or Samhain or Siren or one of those, or they're indie publishers. Des Burke, Minx Malone. These are people who are filling that need.
Now, a follow-up question for that: if just say you have a black woman with a white guy, would you go with romance? Like if you want to get really category nerdy about it, would you go like romance, interracial, and then also African American romance, or would you try to just stay within the specific romance category and not move? Because I know African American has its own like 5 different separate subcategories,
Right.
or have you? What,
What I do is when I'm uploading through KDP, I will do like I'll choose romantic suspense and contemporary, and then in my keywords I will use interracial, multicultural, black woman, white man, and that gets me into those little subcategories. Because like I think generally like in a new release month, I'll have like every single book in the Russians and every single book in Conley Brothers will be on the top 100 for those multicultural and interracial lists. So that's how I do it. I don't specifically go into the African American romance category. I go into the broader, bigger category and then use the keywords to force into the smaller ones.
That's a great pointer for everyone. Now the one thing, because we mentioned briefly that like your series crossover, do you notice that your audience pretty much will read then all 10 of your books and follow you everywhere then also?
Yeah, I think not too long ago I actually did a breakdown where I was looking at the numbers that I had of sell through. And so basically between 25 and 30% of the readers who pick up my perma-free, which is Ivan, go on to book two, which is Dimitri. And once I get them to Dimitri, I have like between 85 and 132% sell through from Dimitri through all of the through Sergey too, and then almost all of them go on to read Kelly and Jack and Finn and Collateral.
Well, that is amazing. That's like the power of having a series then.
Hmm.
Because a lot of people write like these like one-offs or maybe
Yeah.
two-book series, and then they write something different and they can't get their own audience to like transfer over. To be able to get them to read 10 books is pretty amazing.
I think you have to make it really easy for them also. One of the things I did was right around the time that I was in the last box set, the Beyond Desires box set, I started redoing my front and back matter. And so like now when you open my books, the first thing you'll see is the blurb for that book, so the back copy, and then underneath it has a list of every single book in that series that you're reading. And the series, the link is vendor specific. So if you're reading on you bought it from Amazon, it'll take you right to the next Amazon, right? And I also use like affiliate links so you can make a little extra money, right? Because everybody loves free money. So
Yeah.
Who doesn't?
I also have a link to my newsletter. Then at the very end of the book, after the last line, it will say like, the next book, the Her Russian Protector series continues with, Dimitri, right? So you can click on that, and it'll take you directly to Dimitri within that vendor. And then right underneath that, I have, to receive like news of like the next coming books or arcs or whatever, join my mailing list. I have that right underneath there, and I saw a huge jump in the numbers of sales and also in my mailing list by doing that.
Yeah, because when I looked at your author page on Amazon, just into the description, I saw you had the link to your newsletter. When I went to your website, there's like a little tab for newsletter and Street Team. Um, it's really smart. Um, do you do anything else to build your mailing list other than just putting like the front matter, back matter, author page? Um,
In the early days, I did a lot of giveaways and things like that. But the more I think about it, the more I don't really think that's a good idea, because I think then you end up muddying your mailing list, not with readers who want your next book, but with people who want to rent a gift card or whatever. So one of the things I've been thinking about is still doing giveaways and things, but having a separate like free newsletter, so like through MailChimp or whatever, that I would use only for those kinds of entries. Because what I was thinking is that the people who are going to sign up for a newsletter for a chance to win a gift card are probably the same people who would like to get a freebie or a sale, right? So I want to push my numbers up. That would be a good list to have, I think, possibly. We'll see.
now one,
Roxy.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, Kevin. I was just
I,
gonna, before we move too far away from talking about crossover from book to book, I may have missed it because of the tech stuff when I was sorting the site out. But you mentioned there's the Russian series and there's the newer what was the do you say the
Fighting
word?
Connolly's.
Yeah. Now, are they directly linked? Is there crossover between those series? And have you seen the same sort of crossover between the newer series and the Russian series?
Yes, definitely. So
The
I talked.
Albanians.
Right, the Albanians. So the Albanians, you meet Bessian, who is, at the time you meet him in Ivan's book, he's kind of like a street captain. But by the time you get to Nikolai's book, the Albanian boss has been clipped and he's stuffed in a trunk, and so Bessian takes over at that point. So when I did the next series spinoff, I used Ben Beecherai as the spinoff for Collateral. And you meet him actually in the Fighting Connollys in Jack's Arms. He's a pretty big character in that one.
So, Roxy, I have a question there before we get back to more questions from the site. So, I haven't read all of the Russian Protectors series, but I've read the first couple, and I've read the Fighting Connollys. And is it my imagination, or is there a different voice in those two series?
I think there is because the Connolly brothers, they're good guys, right? They're
Yeah.
former Marines. They don't want anything to do with the underworld. Whereas the Albane debt collection and the Hiroshima Protector series, these people are in it, like they're in that life. And that's one of the things in the Sergei sequel, like even though he's out, you can't ever get out. So I definitely think when I read them sometimes I notice there's a different voice, and I was thinking about that because I was going to start doing audiobooks, and I was thinking I'm going to have to get a different narrator because it's a completely different feeling in those books.
So I'm wondering if that now I've lost my train of thought where I was going with that, but that changes the branding decision, right? Like so that explains why the Fighting Connollys are kind of a standalone trilogy in the same world, but not an extension of they're not books 5 through 8 in a 10-book series.
Right.
And
yeah, they
has there been are you still glad because you mentioned that if you were to do something differently you'd publish them in a different order, and is that because there's that voice interruption?
I think so. And I think also that the readers who first found Roxie through Ivan and Dmitri and Yuri Nikolai, they want a very specific type of story. And the Fighting Connollys, even though they're in that world, they're not of that world. Does that make sense? So it's a different kind of alpha male. So I definitely think that I should have stuck with the Russians just to keep building that series before I made the jump.
Now, one question I have about your series, because you have actual fighting going on, and you have romance going on, and then you obviously have like background plot involving enforcers and stuff. Like, what would you say? Like, is the not like I hate to be nerdy, but like percentages, like how much sex is there as compared to like actual fighting in the ring, as compared to like other plots?
Yeah, it depends on the book. I think Ivan was probably like maybe a third sex, and the rest was plot. Dimitri was probably a little heavier on the sex because they'd been friends for a year. So I mean, that couple, they jumped into bed like in the second chapter or something like that. But then again, now Nikolai's book doesn't have sex till the very, very end. Like there's literally 1 or 2 sex scenes in the entire book because Vivian is a different kind of girl and she wanted to get married first. So definitely a different feeling. That book is much more violent and in the world of the mafia.
Now, just one quick follow-up to that. Do you prefer to start a book like that with like a fighting scene, or do you find it better to start off with a romance scene? Because I mean, you're alternating in different kind of worlds. So which do you think works better?
I always start the book with the heroine in trouble, right? So like as soon as you open the book, you know that she's got this problem and it's not something that she can solve on her own. Even though she's pretty strong, she realizes that she's going to have to go get some help. And so that's usually how I think that's how I started every single one of them, actually.
Good to know.
Cool. There's just a couple of random questions from the site that don't really fit anywhere, so I thought we should just hit them up now. They're more like tech questions. Brenna Aubrey asks, at what point did you make Ivan perma-free, i.e., when you released book 3 or 4 or question mark? That's the first one.
So Ivan went perma-free in October, I think, of 2013, and that was right before Sergei, so book 5 came out. So I had 4 books, and right before book 5 came out, and I had just done, in September, I had done a box set of books 1, 2, 3 on a BookBub for 99 cents. And it moved like a crap ton of copies in that first week. And then I had started to see this kind of slow slump, and at that point I thought, I ought to give Permafree a try. And I think Ivan moved like 65,000 copies, something like that, in the last 2 weeks of October. So yeah, so I guess it was right around between book 4 and 5 when I made it perma-free.
Cool. Hope that helps, Brenna. And the next question is from Kate Morgan, and this is kind of a tech Scrivener question. Do all the vendor-specific links through Scrivener and individual compiles? That sounds like a hell of a lot of work.
I don't use Scrivener, which I know everybody thinks I'm crazy because I don't. I actually prefer, I know I can see everybody's faces. I actually just prefer Microsoft Word. I'm a pretty simple girl. But I build my books. I used to build them like from scratch the way Nadia Lee does them. But then I moved over to like Judo, I guess. But I am thinking about hiring that out because it really is a crap ton of work. And I think my time would be better spent doing other things and fighting with that.
Cool. Speaking of Nadia Lee, she's going to be doing an interview on the site, which Kevin doesn't know, but I've been talking to her, so
You're
she's doing that.
cheating on me on the blog, Carl.
Yeah, man. I've been cheating on you with loads of people on the blog. You just don't know yet. It's all
God,
coming.
you're such a man whore. Anyway, another because I didn't get to this question. We were talking about mailing lists, so I'll just derail the podcast to ask you this.
Okay.
There are some people that use their mailing list to try to give away a whole bunch of ARCs to try to get a shit ton of reviews, like on release day. And then there's other people I know that use their mailing list to try to get immediate sales on release day. Which kind of camp are you in on that?
Um, I actually don't use my mailing list on release day. What I do is, I think it was in Let's Get Visible, he talked about staggering social media. And so what I generally do is the first day a book is out, I just use social media. So my Facebook, my website, and Twitter. And then like the next day, or right as I'm going into the third day of release, I will use my newsletter to get a big bump. And that way I can stay like in the top 100 or right around the top 100 for like a week or so. Um, so that's how I use my mailing list.
Roxy, on that point, what else do you do to try and get bumps in that release week, right? Because so social media and your mailing list, those are 2 days, maybe
Hmm.
three. The mailing list opens continue for a couple of days, right?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do.
Do you do 99-cent releases in order to get like an ENT ad or something like that in that first week? Do you do any other
I
kind of really promo in that first week?
sometimes I'll do like Facebook ads, and I'm starting to get a little bit better about that. I'm actually planning on doing a whole bunch of Facebook ad experiments in August. I know I do this a lot, like where I experiment with different things. I did do a 99-cent release for in Jack's Arms back in what, February, I guess, January, and that actually went really well. I think I moved like, I don't know, 8,000 copies, something like that in the first week, which I thought was pretty good. Um, So yeah, but I don't stack ads. Now I know when we did our box sets, we stacked the hell out of ads. Like we went like, stack crazy on those, and that worked really, really well.
Okay, that's a good segue to box sets, right? So we've talked about your individual work. How do you make the decision, or how do you choose how much of your time should you spend collaboratively on box set projects and any other projects? I mean, probably the next thing that comes up will be something different than box sets. Do you have a certain number that you do each year? This year you did, you hit the list in 2 sets, 3 sets? Three sets, right?
Yeah, 3 sets back to back to back.
Yeah, that's a lot. Will you
Yeah.
will you do box sets next year, and if so, how many will you do?
I've had invitations to like 10 box sets since May, and I've had to say no to quite a few of them. If somebody wants something that I don't have to write, then I'm more than happy. You know, the Beyond Desires set we did, that was the one that Marie Hall put together, and J.S. Scott was in it, Callie McKay, Nadia Lee, all of us. We used books that we had already written for that one, which made it really easy, you know. There was no extra work, basically. It was just throw your book in and do a whole bunch of promo and reach a whole bunch of new readers. Um, so I don't think for the rest of the year I'm going to do any more box sets. Maybe next year though.
Okay. And the other question that I had, just to go wrap up what we were talking about before, has your marketing plan changed since you started self-publishing, since you were a new author? Because you weren't actually a new author when you started self-publishing, right? And
Right.
today, what would your marketing advice be for either a new self-publishing author or a debut author in general?
I think if you're self-publishing, like I don't understand why people spend all this money on ads and things when they have like one book. Like, what is that about? I mean, that's just like throwing money away. I don't understand that. I think though, if you have 3 or 4 books or you have a series, and sure, why not do BookBub or My Romance Reads or buy a whole bunch of stacked ads that you can do. Um, yeah, I'm losing my train of thought. What was the rest of the question?
Oh, just and so then how has your marketing changed? I totally agree, right? When you've got one book out, you're doing a lot of work to sell one product, right? Better
Right,
to
yeah.
try and put out multiple products before you switch effort. But also once you become a superstar or even a strong mid-list author, I definitely call you a superstar. But once you become a really strong mid-list author, and let's face it, that's what most successful authors still are, right?
Hmm.
Um, your time might be better spent writing the next book because each new release gets you an X amount of income.
It
So,
does.
did you find, this is just a theory and I'm kind of working it out loud, did you find that you had to do more marketing before you hit that kind of critical mass with a solid reader base?
I think I'm doing more marketing now because I know what works. Does that make sense? I
Yeah.
think that's part of being plugged in because now I know people who are selling so many more books than I am, and I can ask them, like, did this work? Did this not work? And I think now I know how to market um, smarter, like work smarter, not harder. And I think before, and you see that a lot with people just constantly on social media and wasting all this time instead of using things that actually work. So, like, I think perma-free, it's cheap, it's free, it doesn't cost anything to do it, mailing lists, these kinds of things work. There are ads that are, I mean, the My Romance Reads ads are really, really affordable. I think they're affordable. They're like 45, $50 or something like that. And you can get 500 to 1,000, sales in a day. So why not spend that $50 and do that?
I just have one last question, and then we can check in with Carl again. So something that was really hard for me when I started was taking some of those royalties that they made those first royalties made my family's life a heck of a lot easier. I know that for you they were life changing. Holding on to some of them and reinvesting them into the business, that's a hard decision when there are bills to be paid. And that's something that I've talked to other writers about too. And trying to convince the husband that some of that money should stay in the business. And so I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, my husband was always like, you should keep reinvesting in your business because his dad had run a small business for a year. So he was like, why aren't you, doing this or that? So he was always really supportive. And one of the things I've been doing is, of course, reinvesting in new covers and things, but also I invested money in audiobooks. And I've done 2 so far. And I was completely in the black with Ivan within like 3 months. And Dimitri was completely in the black within 2. Um, I don't think that's um, normal. I think that I got really lucky and that readers really wanted those audiobooks, and that's why I was able to get out of the red really quickly. But I definitely think you have to plow some more money back into the business.
No, now I have a question for you because you mentioned that the perma-free really works and mailing list really works. And then you said that spending too much time on Facebook and Twitter and stuff is a big time suck. Is there anything else? Because obviously you're very, very successful now, and a lot of our listeners are just starting out. Like, what are some of like the bigger kind of mistakes that people can get caught up into when they first start out that you've learned not to do, other than social media, for example?
Um, when I look back at my traditional career, right, it didn't go, I mean, it went okay, right, but it didn't go very well. And when I look back now, I know that the reason it didn't do very well is because nobody sat me down and said, hey, you should probably write a whole bunch of books in the same genre. How about that? Right? That seems like a really like obvious thing, but I was jumping around between paranormal romance and then I'd write a sci-fi romance and then I'd write a contemporary erotic romance. What the hell was I thinking? I don't know, but it didn't work, right? And so I think that one of the pieces of advice that I followed was that I wrote in a series and I put those books out um, frequently. I think that's the only way right now with the way algorithms and things work and the way readers have so many choices for great books that you've got to get out there and you've got to get out there regularly in front of them. And that seems to be the way to do it, is to write a series and release them back to back to back.
Awesome. I have one question from the site, and then I have a question from me. The first one is from Brenna Aubrey again, who's hogging the questions. Good old Brenna. She called me evil at the start, so she warned you as well, because I like to make people laugh during the live interviews. But that's just because Brenna's easy to make laugh. So she said, have you considered doing any co-writing projects?
Yes, tell her I'm still thinking about the Russian hacker. That's a bit of an inside joke. She plied me with alcohol and got me to agree that I would write a Russian hacker story with her.
There we go.
I want to read it. I want to read it. Yeah.
The fun and games of RWA, huh?
Pretty much.
Do you have RWA gossip before we continue? Is there anything that you want to share?
I didn't really get that much good gossip. I'd spent a lot of time in my hotel room trying to catch up, and then in the evenings just in the bar going to parties. So.
I know that Carl has another question, but if I could butt in here, because this segues really nicely to the question that Cora Seaton asked me in email to ask you. She wants to know, how do you choose which conferences to attend, how many to attend a year, what do you get out of them, which do you recommend to authors? Maybe, for example, an author from like northern BC who has to fly really far to all the conferences.
Yeah, I got really lucky this year because all the really big conferences, RT was in New Orleans, which is like a 6-hour drive for me, and RWA was in San Antonio, which is like 2.5 hours. So I was like, of course I'm going to go. But what I decided to do is I figured that I didn't really need to do a lot of the craft stuff because I can get that at Romance Divas for free, right? So why am I going to spend thousands of dollars for that? But what I did do is I picked conferences this year that were either allowed me to get in front of readers or that allowed me to network. So when I went to RT, I spent like the entire time just meeting new readers, doing reader events. And I also did a little bit of, they had a pretty good self-publishing track. And then with RWA, it was only networking. Like I went there specifically because I wanted to be able to meet an Amazon rep, or I wanted to be able to meet an iBooks rep, or people, I wanted to be able to meet people and hand out business cards and do things like that.
Carl, any more questions from the site?
I'm just looking now. I have another question, and this is from me. So let's pretend for a second that I, Carl Sinclair, am about to start running romance novels, and I want to build a series because I hear all of these wonderful romance authors are making a lot of money doing a series. How, in your mind, should I start going about, one, choosing where I want to write that series, and how do I build and plan for that series? Do I write a standalone novel with sequel potential, or do I plan it from the beginning as a 5 or 6 book series or a trilogy? Like, what would you suggest to someone starting out now writing romance?
I would probably go to the bestseller list. I mean, if you're really going to be mercenary about it, go to the bestseller list and see what's selling. So, like right now, like it's going to be in contemporary. It's going to be, MMA romances. It's going to be motorcycle club romances. And for motorcycle clubs, I mean, let's get real here. The last season of Sons of Anarchy is about to start, which means that you're going to have readers who are, after they watch their Sons of Anarchy episode, they're going to want to read some like hot, steamy, sexy, motorcycle romance. So I would look at what's selling and figure out what you enjoy reading and plan like a trilogy from that. That would be my advice.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll email you later. There's another question from Colin Barnes. I'm just trying to... I think it's been deleted. Just hold on. I just saw it a second ago.
Colin asked such a filthy question that he had to delete it before the internet could see it.
Here we go. So are there any notable forum groups, forums or groups that Roxie would recommend to a new romance author to frequent?
Romance Divas. Like, hands down, you will not find a better group of romance writers on the internet. That group is like, I remember when I joined back in like '06, '05, something like that. I could not believe there were all these New York Times bestsellers just like sitting around happy to help you with whatever you wanted. I mean, it's an amazing place to be.
Yeah.
They keep
Also,
rejecting me.
Do
thank
you
you
do
for
you
that.
welcome the XY community?
Yeah,
Oh,
there's
we
a whole
have
bunch of
dudes. We
yeah,
have
they're called Diva Dudes. Yeah.
yeah.
David Bridger is one. I mean, he's probably one of the oldest members, a male members of the group that I can think of.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll add another uh, push for Romance Divas. I think I did that on my own interview too. But I joined Romance Divas in March of last year, March of 2013, and I had been trying to get in, but the membership had been closed. And the second that it opened up, I applied, and they let me in. Um, and I had written a book, and I was thinking about how to, what do I do with this? Do I submit it? Do I not? And there are lots of traditionally published authors on Romance Divas. You'll find lots of support there for that too. But the self-publishing knowledge bank is massive, and it didn't take me long. It was through the mentor program. I wasn't in the mentor program, but when you join Romance Divas, you have access to the mentor boards. And just like Roxie said that it was the mentor threads that she watched, Deanna and Gemma. Deanna was the mentee, and Gemma was the mentor. And they still talk about that. Deanna still regularly talks about that mentorship really changing her business plan. And so I know about it even though I wasn't around then. For me, it was watching Minx Malone mentor Emily Ryan Davis, who are, by the way, both
Yeah.
New York Times bestselling authors. Emily, as of today, which is
I
really
know.
it's very exciting. And just watching that mentor thread, thinking, I could do this, right? Minx broke it down so easily, and because of that, that's why I decided to self-publish. Yay, Romance Divas!
Yay.
I just want to point out, Carl Sinclair, what PayPal address should the founders of Romance Divas send their commission to?
Um, you can send them to me. I'll spread them out. It's fine. I'll pass
I'll
them
spread them out to my 4 accounts.
on. Zoe, just in case people haven't noticed, Zoe posted. I know I talked a fair bit in the past about being a romance cover model, and people thought it was a joke, but Zoe's new book is coming out, and it's a Viking book, and she posted the link, but I'm just about to share it on the site in its full glory if anyone wants to check it out. And wants to hire me, you can get me at the Geek Walker on Twitter, and I'm happy to pose for any of your covers, including you, Roxy. And being you've been such a great guest, I'll do it for free.
Oh, thanks.
I actually heard that Trish, John, and Wade weren't going to come back to the show until you broadcast topless, Carl.
Well, there we go. We have the cover, so that kind of covers that.
So there's the cover. Okay. Well, we have been going for almost an hour. Do we have some more questions, Zoe? Do you have some more from in your email box? I know you
Yeah,
had
I
a
have
whole pack of
just
those.
one last question, and it might end up being a bit of a longer spiel on Roxy's part. I'm not sure. So a couple of people have asked me to ask you about how do you manage your hybrid career because you're still traditionally published,
Yeah.
and is that something that you plan to continue in the future? Are you open to doing that in the future? Tell us a little bit about managing a hybrid career.
The truth is, I'm probably not doing it very well right now, but I could do better, I'm sure. I think that for me, I didn't realize that like 2013 was going to explode for me self-publishing. So in late 2012, I had signed a whole bunch of traditional contracts, and so I do have a lot of books that I have to write that I'm contracted to write, and I'm sure anybody from Romance Divas probably knows about some of the issues I've had with that. I mean, one of my publishers, didn't pay me and some other fun stuff. But what I do basically is I will do Roxie February, then March Roxie, and then I'll be free. like Braveheart freedom scream free.
And is Lolita Lopez, which is your traditionally published pen name.
Mm-hmm.
Will you self-publish under that name, or are you contractually limited to?
No, I think no. The contracts I have right now, I can self-publish once I'm done with the contracts that I've got out, and I definitely will because I mean, like I have books under the Grand Central Hachette umbrella, and I know something I talked about RWA, like that I've sold quite a few copies of those first two novellas, and I maybe barely made like $4,500 because after 25% of net, that sounds like it's okay money, but like once their accounting alchemy is done, it's like 17% a cover, which is less than I would make if I self-published for 99 cents, right? So um, when I'm working on those books, it's hard for me because I'm thinking I'm losing money working on these projects when I could be writing my independent published books under Roxie and making so much more.
And I'm having muting issues because I've got a toddler who's having trouble sleeping. Your two pen names, they write different subgenres, has different voices. Do you want to continue do you have other series in the future that you'd want to write as Lolita?
Yeah, I mean the Grab books, which is my best-selling series as Lolita. I mean, I had planned on that series going on for ever and ever, and I have so many different like 2 and 3 book arcs that I want to write, but I want to write them on my own terms, right? So they'll have to wait, but I will definitely do them.
Yeah,
definitely.
I think the guys have one last question. I'll ask it. You are cross-platform with all your books, right? You don't publish any of your books on Kindle Select, KDP
No.
Select? No.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. That's something that I hear talked about a lot in author circles when the author circles extend outside of romance, but I think almost the vast majority of romance authors are cross-platform.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we even have retailers like All Romance ebooks that are just for romance novels. So why are you gonna, limit yourself? But I do think you're right. I think maybe it's probably different for other genres. I couldn't tell you, to stay out of Select if you were writing, I don't know, like urban fantasy. I don't even know what those sales numbers would look like at other places.
Yeah, and
I do. Go ahead, Zoe.
I was just gonna say, like, it's almost impossible to do the intensive homework, the studying of all genres, right? It's enough homework to just study romance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, one question that I like to ask romance authors, because I know bikers are big now, and werewolves are always big. It seems like, and I know you have a Viking husband who's also a paramedic. Do you have any kind of like eyeballs into the future? Is a Viking romance going to be big in the future, or maybe a paramedic romance, or any kind of insights on what's going to be the next hot thing?
Well, Viking romance has been big for years. Like the Harlequin historicals, there are some really delicious Viking romances in those. They've been around forever. I don't know about paramedics. I always wanted to write one, but I mean, stretch your sex, hello, hot, right? So I don't know, webbing and all that. So we'll see, maybe.
Just think of all the like binding with the bandages, and I'm with you on this. I'm in.
Oh, there you go, right? It's
I
like
was
bonded
going to write a
dogs.
funeral home romance and call it Stiffs.
That's awful.
Kevin, you're a horrible human being.
I'm an awful human being. Wow.
Hey,
You're also one of my best friends, so I don't know what that says about me.
The interview seems to have deteriorated now, so.
I just wanted to do a couple of things before we wrap up. As always, if you could pop over and give us a like on YouTube on the video, and maybe subscribe to the channel if you found us for the first time because of the lovely Roxie. And head on over to iTunes from one of the links on the website and give us a review. Those are really handy. I wanted to also personally thank Zoe for being absolutely amazing and helping us out tonight because two boys alone would have been a freaking nightmare. And we owe you a lot, and you've been great. So thanks very much
It,
for
w-
coming
it was
on.
it would
And
be very sausagey. I want to thank Zoe for being great and letting Carl insult me instead of her. Um, and obviously, thank you to Roxy for coming on. You've been awesome.
This was so
Um,
much fun.
and then just a heads up, next week we're gonna have Scott Nicholson on, who's pretty much turned into like an indie legend since he's been around for so long. Um, and he has one of the best beards in indie publishing.
yeah, he does, man. I'm gonna ask him all about bearding next week, so that'll be good.
And if you haven't checked it out, just as a quick side note, go check out his author picture because it's one of the coolest looking author pictures I've ever seen.
I agree.
And also
Um,
a great new indie blog you should check out is genrehobo.com.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for having us, guys.
All right, it's been great on the roundtable. We'll see you next week.